It's great. Yeah, I mean, I thought the whole thing was fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
I was kind of blown away by it, really. To,
Yeah.
8 days, I think, and it was just so well put together, so well organized,
Yeah.
and he would have just found it hilarious. I mean, he would
Oh,
have absolutely been in all over it.
I know, imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was incredible. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How
That
long
was.
were you there, Max? When were you there from and to?
So I went up. I think I went up two or three times. I went up on the first day, because I wanted to be there for when the whole thing started, and that was when the Droitwich Community Choir were performing in the marquee in the main square. So I went up for that, and then I just sort of bumbled around and sort of soaked up the atmosphere. Don't think I went to any shows then, and then I went up the following Friday, I think, to meet a couple of people and again just soaked up the atmosphere. And then on the Saturday, I went to see Red Richardson and also Peter Richardson. I met up with Peter Richardson
Oh,
before
no.
his show. So yeah, I just wanted to get a kind of vibe of the whole place because obviously, in terms of writing the biography, it's a kind of key kind of moment, really, if you like, in terms of Rik's legacy and his kind of standing in terms of comedy. And I'm convinced, and you guys may know better than me, but I can't think of a festival that has been created, certainly nothing with that kind of longevity of like 8 days,
Mm.
in the name of a comedian before. I really can't. So I think it's almost like a kind of pioneering thing in Rik's name, which I kind of love.
I'd agree with that. And I think pretty good time to sort of share some of our experiences of being there. So we were there for 2 days across the Wednesday and Thursday, the middle part of the week. And so
Sure.
Katie's set was Wednesday evening at the Old Cock Inn, and that was immediately followed by the Big Rick pub quiz.
Yes.
We did downstairs. Katie's set was upstairs, and the quiz was downstairs.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, the what you say about it being can't think of another example of doing something like that in like one person's name. The way the whole kind of spa town was taken over by everything Rik was
Mhm.
quite something. I think beforehand, I think we were kind of thinking that it might be a little bit, we might be a little bit ambitious for something like this. You know,
Yeah.
how much time can you fill with Rik? You know,
Yeah.
but everywhere, the whole town bought into it. Every shop we went into had
Oh, yeah, they
Rik
did.
stuff in. They were doing, even if it was just like we were fortunate enough to get a very small slot on one of the BBC News teams
Oh,
filming,
right. Okay.
and just the local barber had kind of
Oh,
kitted
yeah, yeah. I saw
their
the barber.
barbers out in Rik stuff, and
Yeah,
it was just a in the space of 1 week, the whole town had just become Rickified. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and it was really interesting to see. But also just the people that we met there. A lot of people that were there, things like the queers and Katie Set, kind of were there from the Hammersmith Hardman page, had found their way there from the page.
right.
And there was people there that had just met because of the festival. I don't know
Yeah,
how many, was it about eight or nine people that had just kind
Yeah,
of
and
come
they're
together.
still, it's like they've known each other all their lives and they're still hanging out now. From what I've seen on Instagram anyway, they're always getting together and doing various comedy or themed things. So yeah.
Yeah. And it
yeah.
just,
The loyalty is extraordinary, isn't it? It
yeah.
really is.
Mm.
And I think, yeah, I think so. Yeah, we were. I was surprised at how much they're able to pack into a week about Rik. And I understand that it's going to become a regular thing. I don't know if you've heard
Well,
that.
yeah. I mean, I was just looking on the website because I was doing some research into some of the performers there, and I went onto the website, and it mentioned that that they're going to be doing it next year. So first of many, hopefully. And I think it's great because I don't think there's really that many kind of comedy fringe festivals. I mean, it's obviously you've got the sort of Edinburgh, which is massive, and you've got things like Brighton and other sort of bits and pieces here and there. But to have one that's just dedicated to, someone like Rik is a really unusual thing. And yeah, long may it continue.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that you caught up with Peter Richardson at the festival, and was it on the Saturday?
Yes.
Do you know him quite well? Because I know you for the Panglobal Phenomenon radio show.
Yes,
He
we
was
put
on
that
that quite
together.
a
That
bit.
was, yeah. I mean, I've met. Peter a couple of times. Prior to that, he runs a kind of comedy gala night down at the Dartmouth Comedy Festival, and I went down there in about I think 2017. And he put together a great, which I don't think he's ever shown again, sort of compilation of great moments of Rik from all his TV shows, but obviously primarily focused on the comic strip. And Nigel Planer was down there. Bonnie Mayall, Rik's youngest daughter, was there, and I did a little piece about writing the ghostwriting Rik's autobiography. And it was just a really nice evening, and sold out crowd, and it was great. So I met Peter then, and then when we were doing Panglobal Phenomenon, got in touch with him, and obviously interviewed him for that, and then subsequently um, met up with him obviously in Droitwich, seen him down in Devon, and we've had various chats. So yeah, yeah, Peter's obviously somebody who has played a huge part in Rik's life. So it's
Yeah,
great to be able to talk to him.
definitely. And there's quite a few people on that BBC Sounds. We just got a documentary, or how do you
Yeah, it was
describe
a
it?
documentary,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it grew out of I got to know a guy called Simon Nichols, who's a BBC producer, and he'd heard about this archive of sort of 114 hours I've got of Rik and I just making each other laugh whilst we were writing his book. And he just said, this would make a great archive on four. They do this Strand archive on four on a Saturday evening. And he said, why don't we just have a punt, put together a proposal and send it in? And we did. And they loved the idea. And so we set about producing that with a guy called Gareth Gwynn, who directed it brilliantly. I mean, it was as much his sort of creation as mine, really. And it was one of the most fun things I've ever done. And it involved me then having to listen to the 114-hour archive, which
that's
I'd
one of the
never
questions
done.
I had. How
Right.
long? Because you played a few clips of you and Rik just talking. I was going to ask how much you had for 114 hours of just chatting
Yeah.
with Rik. Wow.
I didn't realize. I mean, I thought it was about 50 hours. And the thing was that I'd obviously got all of these recordings. And when Rik died in 2014, I was sort of thinking, what do I do with this? Not that I felt that I needed to do anything, and I just thought, well, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to leave it. And I couldn't even listen to it. It was too sort of emotional and sort of painful to listen to it. So I kind of left it there on my hard drive, and it was only subsequently that making Pan Global Phenomenon that I listened to it, and I guess the 10 years intervening, well, at that time it was about 9 years since Rik had passed, that, you know, some of the sort of emotion and the pain had sort of lessened. And I
Mm.
could listen to it, and it brought back so many memories of our time together, and so many memories of things that he'd spoken about. Because obviously the autobiography is very much in inverted commas because it's a sort of spoof autobiography of this character, the Rik Mayall.
Yeah.
But in the making of that, Rik spoke about his life, his real life, quite a lot, and various reminiscences. And we'd kind of then filter that through the lens of the Rik and kind of make it silly and sort of satirize the whole kind of idea of a celebrity memoir. But it just meant that I'd actually got a lot of material about the real Rik Mayall. And so it was wonderful to listen to that. And a lot of it I'd kind of forgotten about because we started doing these recordings in about 2004, in autumn 2004. So it was a long time, it was nearly sort of 20 years previously. And so listening to Rik talking about his career and his life and just little kind of things about, I don't know, just his opinions about things in the news and opinions about sort of life in general and a little bit of politics here and there. And it just made me realize that was the point when I thought to myself, nobody's actually come along and written a kind of real definitive biography of Rik. And I've got this huge kind of resource in terms of all the recordings. I just thought, I'm going to have to, stick my neck out and go for it with this. So that was the sort of impetus to make me want to go away and write a big proposal to pitch to publishers.
Wow. So that in that you're talking about the book you're going to be working on over the next couple of years.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So just sort of going back to the bigger than Hitler, better than Christ book. So did you know from the outset it was going to be kind of largely fictional, or did that just that's just the way it went from starting
It
talking to Rik?
I didn't really, I mean, I didn't really know anything about it until I'd been working with Rik for about sort of 4 or 5 months. So how I got to work with Rik was that I'd had a couple of novels published, sort of comedy novels called Hitman and the Fixer, and I was working in advertising, but sort of showbiz advertising, live entertainment advertising. So I was doing advertising for some of Rik's shows. So I would be booking the ads for Bottom. I'd be booking the ads for things like Cellmates, and anything that was promoted or produced by Phil McIntyre. Phil McIntyre was one of our clients, so I'd be dealing with a guy there called Paul Roberts, and they would sort of phone up as other promoters would and say, "Look, we've got this show going on. Where should we be advertising? What media should we be using?" So I was like a sort of media buyer, and I'd be saying, "Well, you need to use these listening magazines or these national papers or these radio shows," and so I would put together a kind of advertising campaign. And so through that, I'd done the advertising for Waiting for Godot, for example, in '91 at the Queen's Theatre in the West End, gone to the first night party, and very briefly met Rik. I and that was a great experience for me because obviously he was a bit of a sort of hero of mine. But then I had kind of left working in advertising, and I'd had, as I say, a couple of novels published. And because of interest, film interest from producers in one of the novels, I'd started doing some screenwriting. And a friend of mine, a guy called Mark Pye, fellow screenwriter, he was kind of like my mentor, if you like, in screenwriting terms. Um, he read this script. The first script I'd basically written was a thing called The Murderers, which was a spoof documentary about two serial killers who were living in the suburbs in Gravesend. Well, Rik added that it was going to be Gravesend because he thought that was funny. But I'd written this thing, and I'd written this pilot episode, and I'd sent it to my friend Mark, and I'd said, I've written this thing, and as I say, it was a spoof sort of documentary inspired very much by things like The Office, and it was about the one psycho was a guy called Eustace, who's a very mannered Englishman. So you can guess who that was going to be, and it was like a sort of Reginald Christie, 10 Rillington Place. He was that sort of, psychopath kind of character, very mannered, talking about table manners and all of this, even though they're sort of, cannibals or whatever. And the other character was going to be called Billy Ray, who was going to be a sort of Texas chainsaw wielding kind of lunatic. And it was a very kind of thinly veiled satire on Blair and Bush, because obviously this is 2004, the Iraq War was going on. So it was going to be a sort of bit of a satire on Blair and Bush. And Mark said to me, "Why don't you send this to Rik Mayall? He would be fantastic as the Eustace character." And I was just starting out. This was like my first screenplay. And I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, what are the chances of him reading this and liking this? So I sent it off to his agent, Ord Powell, and thought no more about it because, you send things out as a writer to many people hoping that, somebody will bite, and very rarely do they, especially when you're just starting out. Anyway, I got a call from Ord Powell about a week later saying, "Rik's read your screenplay, absolutely loves it, and would like to meet you."
Wow.
So this was obviously hugely exciting. Went along to his house in Notting Hill, met him, got on really, really well, and started writing this sitcom. And we ended up writing like 6 episodes of it. And we got some interest from Baby Cow, which is Steve Coogan's production company, and went along there, and we were chatting to Henry Normal and Ted Dowd, and we were trying to pitch it to the BBC, and it was a very, very long story, but In the end, we didn't manage to get it away, which was a source of great frustration for
Mm.
myself and obviously Rik as well, because he loved it and thought this would be a great kind of follow-on in terms of his kind of TV career, and for various different reasons. Maybe it was too. I mean, it was very horror. It was proper horror comedy. It was pretty over the top in places, and maybe it was a bit. We scared off the BBC because of that. I don't know, but anyway, it didn't happen. And at the same time, Rik had been approached by HarperCollins to write his autobiography.
Right.
And so Rik just said to me one day, uh, you know, let's go for a walk. Rik loved to walk around the local area, and I loved those walks. It's fantastic, and people would recognize him, and he'd be very funny with them and very generous and kind. And we were just wandering around, and we were on Portobello Road, and he said, "Oh, I've been offered this deal, by HarperCollins to write my autobiography, but I don't want to write my autobiography. I want to write, I want to get this deal, and I want to, create another Rik character, as in Rik the poet." Or Richie Rich, Filthy Rich, and or Richard, sort of Bottom, and all of this. I want to create another character who will share exactly the same history as the real Rik Mayall, and we will write this book as a kind of autobiography of this maniac who's
Mm.
been offered a major publishing deal. And that was the idea. So that was the sort of concept behind it. And then we set about creating it, and we thought the easiest way of doing this would be to record our conversations, making each other laugh, just being silly and coming up with ideas, but in so doing, also talking about Rik's real life and what he really did and what he really thought about things. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's how it all came about.
So I read the book not long after it first came out, and I just do remember at the time I didn't realize it was going to be what it was. And I imagine a lot of people got the book not realizing what they were going to get. And I remember really thinking it was a wild ride at the time.
Yeah.
But there was you did recognize the true bits of Rik's life.
Yes.
From talking about the various things it was in, where he started, Manchester meeting age, obviously his accident and things like that, and the shows he was in. So you could see the thread of
Yes.
reality, but everything else around it was just, yeah, was mad.
Yeah.
So I was disappointed because I wasn't disappointed because it was hugely entertaining, but it was also really good to hear that there is actually going to be a biography of Rik's life coming up
Yeah.
at some point that I imagine isn't going to be quite as wild as the
No.
as the 2004
No, it's not at
version.
all. No, I mean we used to joke about this, and the fact that at some point we'd have there'd have to be a real biography of him, and he used to joke about, oh, well, you can do that, in years to come, and obviously didn't realize quite the sort of poignancy of those words, but yeah, I mean it really was a case of we'd be talking about various things that Rik had done, and he'd be telling the sort of the reality, the truth of it, and then we'd be, I'd be sort of typing these things up and sort of giving him drafts. And then we'd realize that actually we were falling into the trap of actually writing a real autobiography, which is something that Rik really didn't want to do because he didn't want to show his real life. He felt like the real Rik Mayall was something that, it wasn't that he wanted to keep any closely guarded secrets, but he just felt that, his life as a sort of family man and somebody away from stage and screen he was just a dad, and a husband, and a family man, and he
Mm.
felt that he didn't want to go into that sort of celebrity autobiography. You have to remember, in about 2004, it was the kind of golden age of these celebrity biographies, autobiographies. A lot of people were being offered a lot of money in the publishing industry to write these things, and they were coming out with these books that were, quite heartfelt, and sometimes they were a bit sort of self-lacerating, and but some of them were a little bit, slightly eggy in terms of their kind of like talking about their great showbiz lives and their great, celebrity friends and celebrity lives that they led. And Rik really didn't want to do this. He really, I mean, this is gets to the heart of Rik, really, in terms of he would take a concept. I mean, you look at something like Kevin Turvey. You've got a guy who is, ostensibly a roving reporter doing a to camera, 5 minute to camera piece about something. And so he takes that sort of convention, that broadcasting convention, and then he fucks it up. And then and it was all this thing Rik used to talk a lot about, being crap on the telly. And that was part of his kind of thing, was being crap on the telly. And so he wanted to take that concept of the way he kind of satirized and messed around with the conventions of broadcasting. He wanted to take that concept and bring it to the world of publishing. And this kind of world of like the celebrity autobiog that was, as I say, very big in about 2004, with all, if you look at the sort of some of the kind of non-fiction bestseller charts around those times, you'll see a lot of those books were out there. So there was this sort of, this sort of tell-all kind of idea behind these things. And he wanted to take that convention, just as he had done with so many other things, and mess around with it and play it up for, lampoon it, make funny out of it. And it's interesting you say about, you said you weren't disappointed, but in a way, in terms of learning about his life, you were maybe a little bit disappointed. And that if you look at some of the reviews on Amazon and some of the reviews that we got, even in the press at the time, it was like there was a sense of, people, I think the real hardcore fans loved the fact that he was bringing this same sensibility that he brought to other aspects of his career to the world of the celebrity biog. But there was a sense that actually, some people really did want an autobiography
Yeah.
of Rik Mayall. They did want to know what he felt about life and what he felt about, broadcasting and his career and all these things. But actually, although we got a lot of that down on the sort of archive of recordings we made together, he keeps coming back. There's like this constant riff that he comes out with on the recordings where he's saying, we're falling into the trap of actually writing a traditional autobiography. And this is something, if you listen to Panglobal Phenomenon, there's a little bit in there. He mentions, we don't want to do that. We want to create something where it's like this is a book written by a madman. You're in this sort of stream of consciousness of this sort of crazy person who, has been given a book deal and he's just chucked everything in. There's spelling mistakes, there's grammatical mistakes. He gets people's names wrong.
Mhm.
Every time he mentions, a celebrity or somebody he's worked with, there's either a yes or a no in terms of whether he shagged them or not, and it's nearly always yes. In terms of the sort of the Rik character. So it was a very conscious decision that it wasn't going to be this sort of, heartfelt celebrity autobiography,
Mhm.
and was going to be this sort of, crazy dive into the mind of a madman who thinks he's the most important sort of cultural, character in the world, hence bigger than Hitler, better than Christ, So yeah,
Definitely comes across. I've not reread it for a while, but it's something I might do now. Having listened to Panglobal Phenomenon and heard you talking about it, just to see how it would come across now. I read it, like I say, back in 2004, so I was only in my early 20s then, and
sure,
so yeah, I'm in my early 40s now. So I might have a slightly different reaction to reading it. But I think also we can sort of, this is pretty good of a segue into kind of the page and the people that are out there now and social media and how people perceive it. Lots of people, when we talk just generally about Rik, do mention the autobiography and do kind of express. Some people loved it, some people hated it, I think is what I
oh
would
yeah,
say.
yeah, no, it's very
There is no
marmite,
kind of in
yeah,
between. There's
yeah,
no like,
yeah,
oh
yeah,
yeah, I quite enjoyed Rik's book. It is kind of, there's a lot of disappointment and there were people who really wanted that proper autobiography. And
yeah,
other people that just thought, yeah, it was just complete Rik. It was everything they would have expected from Rik. So
yeah.
there is an interesting divide there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say about kind of reading it. I think the issue with it was that people picked it up and started at the beginning and sort of read it as you would a traditional sort of non-fiction autobiography. But one of the things that Rik wanted to get across, he kept talking about it being like a toilet book, the sort of book that you'd have in the toilet where you just pick it up and you just open it at any page and you just laugh, or you just read a chapter completely randomly and completely out of odds, out of order with anything else. And I think that was what he really wanted the book to be, was something that you didn't read from, beginning to end. You just picked it up and just read a moment.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, it was that kind of essence, especially in terms of the letters. I was really chuffed to see Benedict Cumberbatch reading a letter. I think he's part of the organization, a charity organization called, I think it's called Letters of Note, and they do live events at the Albert Hall and various other venues. And he did the event this year. It was at the Albert Hall, and he read the letter in Bigger Than Hitler, which is the Rik getting thrown out of the Live Aid recording, and which was something that we loved writing together. It was very, very silly and obviously completely fictional. But Benedict Cumberbatch read it brilliantly, and I was very excited to see him do that. But yeah, it is just something. It's a book you dip into and you dip out of, and you don't read it really trying to find anything of great moment in terms of the real Rik Mayall, and that was absolutely how he wanted it to be. I think the most honest section, the section which really gets to the heart of a truth in Rik's life, is the section regarding the quad bike
Hmm.
and the accident there, and the sort of bizarre behavior that Rik displayed when he was recovering, when he was in hospital, and he escapes from hospital. And because of the sort of nature of the book, I think a lot of people felt that that was made up, all of that side of things. But it wasn't. That was true, that he did genuinely think that he was in prison when he was in hospital. I think it was at Charing Cross Hospital in London when they'd moved him up from the West Country after the accident. And he thought he was in prison. He thought the nurses were sort of, prison guards. And he managed to escape, still in his sort of like gown, his hospital gown, managed to hail a taxi and got home. And as I say, I think people, because we'd set up that whole kind of like fictional angle, people thought that was made up, and it wasn't. It was real. But he tells us, that part of the book is really quite honest.
Yeah.
And there's other parts, that aren't, you wouldn't necessarily expect, where actually he's telling the complete truth. So yeah, but as I say, it's not a book to be read from beginning to end.
No, but I think I will try and do it from beginning to end, or just use it as a toilet book.
Yeah,
See
yeah.
whichever one
Or
works.
or read it from end to beginning. You probably get as much, as from that. Yeah.
Something that I picked up on in the Panglobal Phenomenon documentary, this is again a good segue into kind of Bottom itself, was talking about a little bit about just Rik and Ade, what they worked together, and that how Bottom was described as the final evolutionary stage of Rik and Ade's comedy partnership.
Yeah.
I don't know, something about that just feels really powerful because I think it was the last thing they did together. I think,
Yes.
and then they did it for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So I think the first series of Bottom was first broadcast in 1991.
Yeah, I was looking at that actually only the other day, and I think it was almost exactly the time when they were doing Waiting for Godot,
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
coincidentally in the West End. Yeah, I think September 91, something like that.
yes, exactly 91. And then obviously it did the three series. It did the five live shows, the film. I think the last live show was 2003. And then
Yes.
I think from sort of putting timelines together and these things that come up, these are the sorts of things that come up on the page. And when we're chatting about Bottom, I think the last thing they did that was Richie and Eddie was, I think Aid was on some kind of comic relief type dancing thing,
Yes.
doing something, and then out of nowhere, Rick just came on and started hitting him with a frying pan. As
Yeah.
far as I can tell, that was the last thing they did together in as Richie and
As
Eddie.
far as I'm aware, it is. Yeah, it was sort of Strictly, wasn't it?
Something
So
like
it
that.
was like
Yeah,
a
I can't remember
celebrity
exactly.
Strictly thing, and then they did a charity comic relief thing, and then
Yeah.
there, yeah.
And that would have been about, I don't know, late noughties. So Richie and Eddie, Bottom Richie
Yeah.
and Eddie stretched from 1991 to something like 2008, 2009.
I think it might even be a little bit later
Oh,
than that.
really?
I think it might even be. I've probably got it in my notes somewhere. I think it's after 2010, maybe, but I may be wrong there. But yeah, you're right, absolutely right. It goes from. I mean, they first met in their first lecture together in Manchester in the class, and I know this because I've written the chapter of their Manchester years together, or I've written a draft of it. They met in, I think it would have been September 1975, and Rik, on the audio archive I've got, he talks about this guy who had long hair and he was smoking and he had his feet on the desk. And Rik, coming from quite a sort of well-to-do school, King's Worcester. Mind you, Aid had come from quite a well-to-do school as well, a boarding school, which I think he'd hated reading his autobiography. And Rik saw this guy, who was he thought he was a bit of a wild man, and that was the first time they'd met. But obviously they worked together. They did 20th Century Coyote when they were at Manchester, and then they kept that going as a sort of double act. It had been five of them originally, and then it became a double act. And so, so yeah, I think if it is, say, around 20, if we say 2010, something like that, when they first sort of appeared, well, or last appeared on television together, that's a long time. What's that? Sort of 35 years, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
They performed, they sort of worked and performed together.
I think it's interesting that it was the longevity of Bottom itself over that period from 91 through to say 2010. Um, I wouldn't have expected them to be able to get so much out of one set of characters to over
Yeah,
such a long period of time. So think about the page. Um, in terms of the followship, you're looking at kind of I think the most common numbers of age of followers, something between the age of about 35 and 50, I think, is the most
sure.
common age. But there's a lot of followers in their late teens, a lot of followers in their 20s, and a lot
Yeah,
of older followers too. So in terms of the reach that Bottom has, people are picking it up now
yeah.
that weren't even born when Bottom first came out.
This
Um,
is what I find so extraordinary in terms of that as a sitcom, because you think of things like the young ones, you think things like, the New Statesman, you think of Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, which I think is a sort of unsung gem of British comedy. And yes, they have a huge following and a fanaticism amongst their fans, and it's just wonderful pieces of television. But it's only really with Bottom that you get this sort of longevity in terms of people discovering it, and even sort of young people discovering it now. Um, and it seems to be drawing in new audiences all the time, which I don't know that those other shows are.
yeah.
So it's like forever young in a weird sort of way that it keeps bringing these audiences in.
It does. I think we could give you a bit of insight into that. So the first podcast that Katie and I did together just under a year ago, um, it's one I've been planning to do for quite some time, but never got around to kind of putting it together. It was basically I called it Your Bottom,
Yeah,
and basically just put loads of calls out on the page to ask people, but just what bottom meant to them. And it could be
yeah,
anything. What doesn't have to be anything particular. But just what when you say bottom, what does the show mean to you? They got loads of different stuff. But the two most common things that people talked about were just Rik. Like people just loved Rik, and the people it was part and parcel of introducing them to Rik, how they first discovered him, and how they've just continued to love him and everything that he's done. But probably the most common thing was how people got into Bottom initially. And I can't remember off the top of my head every single thing that people said, but the main way people were finding Bottom that weren't kind of our age, that I around when it first came out, was through family. So
right, okay,
um, parents, siblings,
yeah,
uncle, whatever, just sitting them down and saying, "Watch this." I mean, that's
yeah,
correct, Katie, isn't it? That was kind of one of the overarching themes
Yeah,
was it
definitely.
was like a family experience, right?
Yeah, a lot of people's dads introduced them to it, so it was interesting the way the kind of the gender swing. It was mostly people's dads, but it's probably just a bit of irresponsible parenting in a nice way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think from in terms of the age groups as well, I mean, people were discovering it very, very young too. So being introduced to it kind of like 9, 10, 11.
Yeah.
And I think again we discussed it on the podcast. I think one of the real attractions to Bottom, and maybe part of the longevity to it too, is that as a child, as a kid, as I'm someone who's like maybe 9, 10, you're drawn into the kind of cartoon violence of
Yeah.
it, and the slapstick and the silliness of it, and some of the naughty words, obviously, as well,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But a lot of it does go right over your head. The innuendo goes over your head, and some of the political references, you just have got, it doesn't mean anything to you, and you can sit there, and we can think of 3 or 4 jokes at the top of our heads that you'd laugh at the time, but have no idea why you're laughing.
Yeah.
But as you get older, you can almost reappreciate it again. I
Yes.
think one of the ones we talked about the most on the podcast was I don't, how familiar are you, where does Bottom sit for you, Max, in terms of uh, from a sitcom point of view? Big fan or just
Oh yeah, no, big fan. But interestingly, I didn't really. I mean, I kind of watched it when it first came out in '91, and obviously a huge fan of all things Rik, that had come out of originally Kevin Turvey and the Young Ones. Massive fan of both of those things, and then obviously Blackadder and all of these, and everything that he'd done subsequent to that. But when Bottom first came out, I watched it and I kind of I loved it, obviously, but I didn't really, uh, I think, appreciate it as much as when I started working with Rik and decided that, I needed to rewatch a lot of the stuff that he'd done. And it was really going back and watching a lot of the things that he'd done before, including Bottom, that I really sort of got it a lot more and sort of appreciated it a lot more. And yeah, I absolutely love it. I'm probably not as much of a fanatic as you guys, but I absolutely love what it was doing. I think when I originally watched it, I was thinking, oh, this is kind of Rik the poet and Vivian have kind of grown up.
mm,
And I think partly it was to do with the set, partly to do with the kind of cartoon violence. It felt like they were doing something that they'd kind of done before, and they were using the dynamic between the sort of Rik the poet and Vivian characters, and they were sort of building upon that and taking that further, and they were taking that into the realm of Laurel and Hardy and taking it into the realm of Tony Hancock.
mhm,
And you get that feeling, that sort of Tony Hancock, that kind of sense of ennui, that kind of sense of sort of I don't want to get pretentious about it, but almost kind of existential kind of loneliness that these two characters have. They're kind of rejected by society. They're losers. They're basically losers, complete losers. And I don't think I really appreciated that until I got it second time around. And a lot of that was Rik talking about Bottom and talking about those characters. And also, I think the fact that it was so much different from things that Rik had done before, certainly in terms of Rik in The Young Ones and Richie Rich in Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, in that Ben Elton isn't writing in Bottom. And it gives it a very different kind of angle in terms of the actual words on a page. And I'd I've always been a huge fan of Ben Elton. And I think when I first watched it, I kind of missed Ben's writing a little bit. I was expecting a bit more of that kind of, the young ones, Filthy Rich, a bit of kind of Blackadder, because I was almost kind of waiting for the Ben Elton isms, if you like, which didn't come. And it is a different, they take a different kind of angle in terms of their writing, obviously, because it's a different dynamic. And so I think, as much as I loved it, I didn't really get it as well as I got it second time around.
gotcha. Yeah, that's fair, I think. Yeah, as they say, you can watch it and rewatch it at different times, and like you say, sort of take something different from it. But you mentioned there about Rik talking about it, and I think you get the impression from things like Abe's autobiography and the Bottom Exposed documentary that Rik was a lot more passionate about Bottom than Abe was. I think that's just kind of how it comes across. I think Abe was proud of it, but I think it felt like Rik was more passionate about it. How did he talk about it? Like when he
Oh, he
spoke
talked
about it?
he talked about it with enormous affection. And I think it was, as I said, and as you mentioned earlier, it was this sort of final evolutionary stage in the kind of relationship, the kind of fictional, dramatic relationship of he and Aid. And I think he loved it for that as well, because he saw it as something that had begun at Manchester University in the late 70s with 20th Century Coyote. And, when they were kind of lampooning and sort of satirizing, the comedy of errors and commedia dell'arte and the whole kind of Beckett and theatre of the absurd. And, it had this kind of evolutionary link all the way through the things that they'd done as the Dangerous Brothers, um, and obviously then the Young Ones and everything they'd worked on, and also the fact that they'd done a lot of comic strip things together. That in a way was their kind of film school, if you like, particularly I think for Aid, in terms of learning the process of making films. And so they had all this sort of history, and certainly from reading Aid's autobiography, you get a sense that by the late 80s, that although they sort of, they'd meet up to do things in the comic strip, they hadn't actually worked very closely together for quite some time. And, obviously Rik had been doing things like Drop Dead Fred, and he'd been doing the New Statesman, and obviously achieved a lot of sort of notoriety through that.
Hmm.
But I think they missed each other. I get the sense that they kind of missed working together. And something that Rik spoke about, and also Aid speaks about in his book, is not just the sort of filming side of things, but the writing side
Mm.
of things. They absolutely loved. And this is something that I can relate to, having written a lot with Rik as well, subsequently and years later, that being in a room with him and, writing, coming up with ideas and being silly and just making each other laugh, was just heaven. It
Yeah,
was
I
just a
bet.
wonderful, wonderful thing to do, and so I think, when Rik spoke about Bottom, he wasn't just speaking about, the Richie and Eddie characters and the world that they created in Hammersmith and their sort of flat. I saw something in Rik that was a sort of love of everything he'd done, from being almost being at school through to Manchester meeting Aid, and it was almost like a sort of it was this sort of uh, great moment, this sort of crowning glory, if you like, of his career. And he spoke about it with affection, as I say, about the characters, about that world, but also about everything that had gone before, and his love of Aid, I think, as well.
Sure. That's good to hear. I always suspected it was something that they were both immensely proud of. And again, just going back to how much they did with Bottom itself and then the characters, because if you think about things like Guest House Paradiso, the film, that wasn't Bottom, or like was, it was Richie and Eddie, but they weren't the Richie and Eddie from Bottom.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's good to hear that's kind of how it was viewed. Just think about some of the things we're sort of talking a little bit about what's me. What sort of things are you looking to get about the page, podcast, social
Yeah, I
media?
mean,
What
the
sort of things are
things,
you after, Max?
yeah, I mean, so obviously you're massive Bottom fans, but what prompted you originally to think, okay, I'm going to set up a social media, presence that is kind of a celebration of all things Bottom. And obviously, and the thing I love about the page, and I think I love about it, is that you're obviously bringing that kind of passion for the sitcom and the show and the live shows to it. But it's really sort of created with love. And so, what prompted you to think, right, I'm going to do this?
Um, I I set up this page about 6 years ago, 6 years ago in July. And to be honest with you, I just did it on a whim. I'd not long joined Instagram generally, and I was just following music and comedy pages. I noticed there weren't really any bottom pages. There might be one or two pages dedicated to bottom, but they weren't. Think about things, other things that I'm into, things like Peep Show. Like
Yeah.
you've got like I don't know if you're into Peep Show. You've got things like
Yeah, I
Dobby
love
Club,
Peep Show.
which is a
Yeah.
massive Peep Show page. And I
Yeah.
recall back then that had something like 10,000 followers, and it posted every day, and it did just screenshots, but it did clips, and it did like memes, and did a bit of everything. And I thought there's nothing for bottom out there. Like maybe I can do that.
Yeah.
So I was actually drunk at a barbecue and a bit
Right.
bored.
Okay.
So I just sat there and made the page. And all I did for the first few months was just post screenshots with captioning. Just did that relentlessly. And it just kind of slowly gathered pace. And it
I
wasn't
love the
until
captioning, by the
COVID.
way. The
Sorry?
captioning's great. I love the captioning. I think
Yes.
that's one of the reasons why it does so well is the sort of captioning, the creativity you bring to that works really well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's because I tend to pick, but I do just the screen grabs. I just tend to pick quotes that people like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that sort of thing. Um, and then it didn't really go anywhere until COVID. And I think this will be the case for loads of people that
Yeah.
do stuff on social media.
Yeah.
Um, Once COVID happened and everyone was just sitting around, I was just sitting around. I mean, I had a job still, and I wasn't furloughed or didn't lose my job, so I was still working.
Yeah.
But I used to live in Buckinghamshire and commute to London, and so I was getting a lot of time back,
Yes, of course.
And with
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
time, I then started to be a bit more creative. So I did things like I did things like the Young Ones week, where I went through every single character or actor that had been in both Bottom and the Young Ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did posts about that, and I did like Bottom Fashion Week. So I just went and did like stupid costumes that they wore. Like I did a day dedicated to Richie's apron and stuff like that,
Yes.
and Richie's pajamas, which actually Katie owns a pair of Richie's pajamas, which is
Fantastic.
great. Um, and then that's when it started to gather pace.
Yeah.
And then I think, yeah, once it started to gather pace and I got like a couple of thousand followers, I started to do like introduce myself to the page. So
Yeah.
rather than just being about it, I did a couple of things where I ordered some stuff off eBay and Amazon that are bottom related and filmed myself unboxing them and talking about them. So it was
Yeah.
like a DVD, a couple of VHSs, and there's a book, I think. And that got mixed reviews.
Right.
I think a few people are like, oh, it's really interesting. It's interesting to see the person behind the page. It's interesting to hear you talking about your personal experiences. But there are quite a few people that said, yeah, just stick to posting clips, mate. That was quite a
Right.
common reaction.
Brutal.
Yeah, yeah. But you got to expect that. I think you got to expect
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're gonna do something on social media and then you're gonna put your face to it, like
Yeah.
you got to expect people to, criticize and whatever. Um, and then yeah, so it just picked up. And then I think the defining moment that led to kind of where the page is now was back when the King Charles was coronated, and
Yeah.
loads of people were sharing this really stupid meme about I'm going to tell my kids this was Charles and Camilla.
Right.
So I took a picture from bottom finger where they go to the
Yes.
hotel
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
Richie and Eddie Weiner. And I
Yeah.
just took this shot. It was like must be a promo shot because they're both looking at the camera.
Yeah.
I just did that meme, and then out of nowhere, it must have just got shared in all the right places. Um, I don't know how. It just and after I posted that for the weeks afterwards, I was getting no joke about 10,000 followers per week, just
Wow.
out of nowhere. It just became relentless to the point where my phone was just constantly buzzing, going off, and the feeds were just yes, but it was that post. I can trace it back to that was the post that got shared.
Right.
Um, and it hasn't really stopped since then. To be honest, I had no idea that there were that many bottom fans on Instagram. Because
Right.
if you think about the demographics of different social media platforms,
Yeah.
Facebook to me is more the platform where you would see people that would like bottom, given the age group that use Facebook more.
Yeah.
Instagram is
Yeah.
very much a younger person's social media
Sure.
app, although it's becoming, I think it is the most common social media app now, I think.
Yeah.
So obviously it shifts. There is always the social media platforms they change and the demographics shift. So I was really surprised. So I know there's some pages on Facebook that have got thousands and thousands and thousands of followers. There's Twitter accounts that have got tens of thousands of followers. But we're up to about 111,000 followers now. To have that on
Yeah.
Instagram for just for bottom is insane.
It's extraordinary. Yeah. It's great.
But what I would say is, and I guess this is where the kind of the podcast comes in. Um, People are generally just there for the clips.
Right.
Like whenever I do something a bit more creative, talk about the podcast, there's a core group of people who really like that.
Yeah.
If there's probably a couple of hundred people that are really interested in the podcast and will subscribe to that and will download that. But if I post a clip from, say, one of the podcasts that Katie and I have done, we did one recently with the chef Tom Brown,
Oh
who's
yeah, I heard that one. Yeah,
a
yeah,
chef, and he's the reason we wanted to talk to him because he's a massive Bottom fan,
yeah,
but he's also a massive Simpsons fan, and he just shares loads of really like funny clips of the Simpsons and Bottom.
yeah,
And the thinking behind that was this guy isn't. We weren't just talking to him because he was a celebrity,
yeah,
talking to him because he genuinely loves the show.
yeah,
And when we spoke to him, he was really insightful. Like some of the stuff he was coming out with was really interesting. So it wasn't just, oh
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
think Bottom was really funny. There was we had a really good sort of hour and a half chat with him
yeah.
about all things, what Bottom meant to him, how he got into it, kind of links to his family and memories and stuff like that, which was really great. But again, when I put things on the page linked to that, it doesn't really get picked up that much. People aren't that interested
Yeah, yeah. They want the
in hearing
content. Yeah,
people talk about Bottom.
yeah, yeah.
They just want to see clips.
Sure.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's fair enough.
And why not? Yeah, because those clips are great, and that's what I guess created that kind of fanaticism in the first place.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Um,
and, and in terms of Rick, are you a fan of other Rick projects? I mean, the young ones and Kevin and Richie Rich and all of that.
well, essentially, because I learned this at the quiz more. So I mean, I always knew that my Rick knowledge wasn't massive compared to lots of other people, but really the young ones and Bottom, a bit of the New Statesman, but they're the kind of the three things that I really watched. I've watched Filthy Rich and Cat Flap. Um, didn't enjoy it that much, to be honest.
Okay.
So yeah, it really was just Bottom and the young ones. Um, Katie, yeah, I don't know. You're more of a young ones fan than I am, but I don't know where. I can't remember where else your Rick Drop Dead Fred maybe too. But I mean, you.
I would say I was raised in tandem with both the young ones and Bottom, but also Drop Dead Fred or even like Jack and Nori, just basically Rick being peak over the top Rick.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the other ones. I remember my dad saying like, "Oh, I just sat down to watch Filthy Rich and Cat Flap the other day," and I was like, "Oh wow," because I was so used to having this prescriptive like Bottom and young ones, and that's it. But yeah, even some niche things like Shock Treatment, or well, I'm more of a Rocky Horror fan, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I think a lot of people would probably say young ones and Bottom, and that's something to aid Evanson's chagrin a little bit because he did a stand-up tour a couple of years ago and he came out and he said, "I know you all want me to talk about young ones and Bottom, but that was 12 weeks of my life and I've done so much other stuff."
Yeah.
But I guess pay your hits.
Well, yeah, there is a sense of that. Absolutely. That's it's what your audience wants. But I can understand, yeah, he does sort of reading interviews with Aid and reading his book. There is a sense that he feels slightly constrained maybe by
Yeah.
the young ones in particular, and also Bottom, and obviously wants to do other things and explore other sort of roles and other media and all this. So yeah, I mean that's kind of understandable, I guess. Um, but I think with Rick, it was very much, he kind of he loved everything he'd done, and he wasn't someone who had many regrets really in that regard.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. No, and I think he did a lot, and I think doing the Big Rick pub quiz really opened my eyes to that because when we talked about doing it with Stuart, the promoter, the organizer of the Rik Fest,
Yeah,
he was like, make it a Rick themed pub quiz, and obviously it only really being a Bottom and Young Ones fan mainly, to then come up with like a 6 round Rick pub quiz was really difficult
yeah,
because there's so much out there, but I didn't really know much about it. Yeah, I had to really sort of dig around, and it turned out we didn't really cover anywhere near enough for people's likings because there were people there that were huge Rick obsessives and
yeah,
were throwing out things that I can't even remember some of the things people said, but they're things I'd never heard of.
yeah,
But multiple people were talking about these other shows, things that he'd done that weren't covered in the quiz. I
Talking about
found
like
that interesting.
bad news, maybe.
Yeah, but again, bad news. I'd heard of that, but I had no idea
Yeah.
how popular it was.
There was that
Oh,
one
it's
guy,
huge. Yeah.
someone said, oh, I mean, this was a guy who happened to be wearing a yellow dungarees outfit, but he said, oh, a bit more Kevin Turvey next time. You know, I'm like, it says you dressed as Rick for the Honors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I think I saw that guy in the yellow
Of course.
dungarees. Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
saw him knocking around Droitwich. No, it was an interesting one because I don't think Rick even realized how much he'd done. Because I remember when we were writing Bigger Than Hitler, he said to me, "Let's try and at least mention everything I've ever done." So, and he gave me the task of going away and scouring through IMDb, although that was in a very sort of early stage back in 2004. But he said, go try and mention everything we've done. And I realize now, getting into research for the biography, that actually we didn't manage that. There's things that we missed. And so, as I say, I don't think Rick even knew everything. I mean, there's so many things that he did. And one of the things that Rick did that was, I think, really speaks to his generosity and his kindness was that he would do projects if people were, doing a short film or doing sort of an educational thing or doing a pop video or whatever, and wanted him involved. He would do it. He would turn up, even if he wasn't getting paid, and so there was this, he loved working. He just loved the process, and he loved sort of writing and performing and getting out there in front of the camera or on stage or whatever it was. And
Mhm.
so my job now of trying as much as possible to capture everything he did is it's a huge task.
Even things
Definitely.
like Nintendo ads and
Yeah,
I think he did the voice for some was it War Pigs or something, some Mega Drive game, like
Hogs of
that's right.
War.
Hogs of War, that was it. Yeah.
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 It was a Black
I've,
Sabbath song. So. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I've just opened up the quiz round questions just to kind of give you an example of the sorts of things we touched upon. So um, I won't go through the whole every single round, but we did a general knowledge round, which we called Wikipedia. So
Right. Of
Wikipedia.
course. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just silly questions like, now, what's his middle name? Where did Rick and Aid meet and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then we squeezed in things like the voiceover that he did for Hogs of War, the Roll Dial, Jackanory read through. Um, I'm just trying to look here so that are the answers. One of them was theme tunes. I did a theme tunes round, so played over
Mm.
the PA system, 10 different theme tunes of things he's been in. And I selected ones that I thought were people would definitely get them. I think most people got these right, but probably left out ones that I'd never heard of because I didn't think people would have got them. But I think I could have put some really obscure stuff in there and people still would have got it because I mean the theme tunes we chose were Boston Young Ones, American Werewolf in London, Shot Treatment, Jackanory, Drop Dead Fred, Man Down, Jonathan
Yeah.
Creek, the Blackadder theme, and Grim Tales.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But there was dozens more theme tunes that could have been put in there, and I think people would have got them.
Yeah.
There was that. It's difficult to describe without kind of, I guess, sounding disrespectful, but some proper like Rick nerds, like
Yeah.
really obsessed and know everything about him, more than I could ever understand.
Mm.
Um, and that I guess that goes right back to the start of having an 8 day festival dedicated to Rick, because
Yeah.
although, so for example, a lot of people that have got that level of obsession met via my page,
Yeah.
they then met other people who had just shared this massive obsession and could just reel off facts and stats and things. And I think a couple of them people said, "Oh, have you got anything about this in there? Have you got anything about that in there?" This was pre-quiz. It's like, nope, 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 not even heard of that. And there
Yeah.
was like disappointment, as if like you should have, surely you've got something about this in there, and that I'd never even heard of. So yeah,
Yeah.
the level at which he kind of even now kind of resonates with people, yeah, it's still. It's incredible to see, I think. It's just incredible to see it at the Rik Fest, the level of kind of Rick obsession. And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
I think I
Um,
Yeah.
walked away feeling like, God, I thought I was a fan until I went to
Yeah.
the Rik Film Festival.
yeah.
I'm sure you were the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that I wanted to sort of ask you, but you've kind of, answered much of it is, why do you think that so, people young people to this day are kind of getting into Bottom and getting into sort of Rik generally. I mean, it doesn't seem to extend to maybe other contemporaries of Rik's quite so much. This level of fanaticism. Is it because he passed away? Is it because there's an element of sort of iconography that grows out of the fact that he's no longer with us? I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Possibly. Katie, I've got a couple of things that have come through just from my observations at the Rik Fest, but is there anything that you've observed or seen?
Suppose something that Rik always said, and I think it's been immortalized in a meme or something, is not to pay attention to authority, because life's much more fun if you don't play
Yeah,
by the rules and stuff. And now, obviously, the world we live in and the politics and the evil white men in charge at the top kind of thing. I
yeah,
can see why a lot of younger people would be kind of apathetic and be like, no, not interested. So, I can see why they would look up to someone who was a bit of an anarchist and,
yeah,
didn't respect authority in that sense. And I suppose he was quite progressive, obviously the young ones being kind of seminal in terms of alternative comedy. But they were quite progressive, if you think back to how things were in the 80s. And now obviously being hopefully a lot more progressive as to where we are today, again, would appeal to the younger generations, but that's my theory.
yeah. No, I think it's a good one, and obviously the start of their careers in terms of 20th Century Coyote, kind of, it was exactly at the time that punk was
mm,
happening.
sure.
And it was big in Manchester. It was a very big. The Sex Pistols played there twice in summer '76, and there was that kind of rebellion and kind of anarchic kind of sensibility was very much in the air.
Yeah.
And that kind of stayed with him. And I think that's a really good point in terms of his kind of two fingers to authority. That's very intoxicating. I think people love that about
Yeah,
him.
you're always going to get the kind of political class and the rebels, the anarchists, or whatever. We've seen that since the 50s or whatever. I
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
alive then, but
absolutely.
there's always going to be that kind of imbalance. But I suppose he was the people's poet, wasn't
He
he?
was
He
he was a
so
he
many
was a
people.
rebel. Yeah, even though he got
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I think people love that as well because they see that in themselves. In that, when you're a teenager and you want to rebel and you want to sort of do things that are wrong or whatever. He kind of personified that as kind of Rik the poet because he knew the lingo, he knew the language of it all, but he'd get it wrong. And
Mhm.
people love that because they see themselves in that about
Yeah.
how when you tried to rebel as a kid and you'd get it wrong, you'd get the terminology wrong or whatever, and it just completely kind of fits with him. You see yourself in him. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good observation. I think a lot of people do see themselves in Rik, whether it's through a character or just through the way Rik was generally. I think, but sort of thinking about well, how he's still picking up fans now. I would look at it from a social media perspective, sort of being
Yeah.
quite immersed in that role. In that, I'm not on TikTok. I don't really do TikTok, but I see quite a few people send me a lot of TikToks that have taken clips from Bottom and just mashed it up with something completely random, like a dance track or something. I've got no idea what's going on. But it's being shared. TikTok's obviously a massive platform, so stuff like that is being shared, and people are picking it up and then being curious about what's this program from years ago that's being mixed with something a song that's big now. What's that about? So I think it's people are picking it up just randomly on social media, and also something that I've picked up a lot is whenever I post something that's purely Rik, loads of the comments, and these are from young people, is that Drop Dead Fred? Because I think Drop Dead Fred is still watched universally,
Yeah. Yeah.
regardless of age and regardless of where you are in the world. People watch Drop Dead Fred. It's still a cult movie that people love. And you take Rik away, there's nothing to do with Rik. Well, it is, but it's just a cult movie.
Yeah.
I get people from America or all over the world just commenting, that's Drop Dead Fred. And then they say, what show is this? And
Yeah.
then I don't tend to answer. I just let other people answer because people always jump in and say, oh, it's Bottom, check it out, blah, blah. And then these people start following the account and then engage with other posts. So I think, again, just the social media age, the way things just turn up on your feeds and algorithms and things like that. If you're a fan of comedy, if you're a fan of whatever, things that I post, things that appear on TikTok or whatever, they're going to find its way to people's feeds that
Yeah.
are going to be 18, 19, 20, and not be at all familiar with bottom and could be from around the country, around the world, it's going to find their way to them. And when they see it, because of the way it does appeal, it can appeal to such a broad audience, from the stupidity, the slapstick, the language, through to the more kind of over your head type jokes. People just pick it up. And just the other thing that just popped into my mind is when we were at the pub quiz, one person that was there literally said that the only reason she'd ever heard of Rik was because of my page. So there's literally
Brilliant. Okay.
there's that someone just sees a clip, really likes
Yeah.
it, and then she's become a Rik fanatic off the back of the page. So I think but there's something that's something about him, isn't it? That is, I
Yeah,
think Drop Dead
absolutely.
Fred is still watched now because it's a cult movie in its own right. But Rik in Drop Dead Fred, that's for a large proportion of his fans and viewers, it's because of Rik. And um, yeah, I think that's what helped carry it through, I think.
Very much. There was an interesting article a few years ago in the Telegraph about how Drop Dead Fred had been discovered um, through lockdown for a lot of people, in that the people who'd watched it first time around in 1991 or whenever it had come out originally were now parents, and they were looking to show things to their kids, and they'd show them Drop Dead Fred, and it kind of had this almost like a sort of second life. But I think Drop Dead Fred had also, beyond that, into all of kind of Rik's characters, or nearly all of most of Rik's characters, is this sense of sort of childhood. He was a guy, and I sort of noticed this very much through sort of working with him and getting to know him. He was somebody who was very in touch with his childhood. A lot of people, friends or whatever, or family members, and they kind of grow up, but they can still sort of almost sort of revert back to how they were. And that sort of ability was very, very strong in Rik. And the fact that he could do that through so many of his characters, where he would, you'd see that child, in within the adult. That again is something that is very compelling for all of us, because we see ourselves in him. And he was someone who's very sort of tuned in to his sort of inner child, if you like, continually. And I think that's a very powerful thing for people.
So,
Mm.
definitely, definitely. I think something we've talked about doing, we haven't actually got around to doing this yet, have we? We were going to talk about like a Bottom Origins podcast, weren't we, Katie?
Mhm.
Where we were going to focus on when we did the Your Bottom podcast, which was more about, just generally your thoughts about, why it's important to you. We were just going to put a call out to people to say, how did you first discover Bottom? And what was it that got you into it? And I'm sure we'll get around to doing it at some point. And if we do, I'll make sure you get the link. So you'll probably get a lot of decent material from that. I'm
Yeah,
pretty
that's a
certain
great
that
idea.
the majority of people, it will be Rik related one way or another. The the obsessions and the things that people link to will probably be around Rik, because that's when we did the Your Bottom podcast. And it was him that came through so strongly in people's
Yeah,
memories. The links to the show. And there's no disrespect to Aid whatsoever, but I think that's just, and maybe, like I say, maybe it's because he's died. Maybe that has had an impact on how people look at attach their memories to shows like Bottom. But certainly, it's always, I like Bottom for this reason, and Rik all
yeah.
seem to go kind of hand in hand, for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I mean, the word gets bandied around far too much, and it's almost become devalued. But he was a comedy genius. He really was, and I think of how much he made me laugh through things like Bottom and through The Young Ones and all the other shows and characters that he played on TV. And yeah, I mean, would make me laugh to the point of hysteria. But he could do that just in his little writing room in his office in Notting Hill, in his home. That he could just a curl of the eyebrow, or and he would do that. And I think that was what was so wonderful about him. Whether it was, he was entertaining an audience of millions on television, or an arena full of thousands of fans, or whether it was just you having a cup of coffee with him over his kitchen table in the morning, he would set about trying to make you laugh. He would set about entertaining you. And again, it gets to that sort of generosity of him that he wasn't one of these comedians who would just switch it on for the cameras or switch it on for the stage. He would switch it on in any moment of his day. Whether it was a family member or a friend or someone who saw him on the street or recognized him or asked for an autograph or whatever it was, he would switch it on and could be as killingly funny just in that moment as he could be, in full sort of makeup and on set or on stage or whatever. He would just do it because that was who he was, and he loved doing it. He just loved making people laugh.
And yeah, that's true. And I think that comes through again, although he's kind of sort of in character, but and sort of in makeup and costume, but in the bottom fluffs
Yes,
when there's fuck ups or something goes wrong, and it's meant to be. Then you can see like the producers are coming on and they're going through scripts and stuff, but he's worried about doing is making that audience laugh and
yeah,
looking at the camera and just doing something stupid to make that period of, I guess, resetting fun for people.
yeah,
Elements are playing, like you say, playing up to the camera and whatever, but his only thought is just to try and do something funny. I think that also came through when talking to Adam McLean, the Bottom Exposed producer, and then something in your documentary, just about whenever people met him for the first time, his first impression would always be something stupid. So he
yeah.
would it wouldn't just be you wouldn't just meet him, shake his hand, and say hi, introduce yourself. He'd always introduce himself in a quite spectacular way.
Oh yeah. Oh
Uh,
yeah, everything was a kind of in that regard, the sort of performative component of his personality would always be at the forefront.
yeah.
He would always be sort of performing in it, and this is something that as I researched the book, both in terms of people who worked with him, whether it was cast or crew or whatever, or just fans who met him at a stage door or at a book signing or whatever it might be, was this they have so many memories. And even just those letters that you can see on social media where people have written to him and he writes back and he's incredibly rude to them or just incredibly funny in some of the things he says. There was always something that would make it memorable for people. I haven't met anybody who just said, "Oh, I met him and he was a bit dull," as is often the way with so many kind of celebrities and people in the public eye. No, he was yeah, everything he did, I think, in that regard was always very memorable, and he just had funny bones. There was
Yeah.
something about him. He could just make you laugh. You could, and this is, you look at some of the scripts of the things that he did, and if you actually just looked at them as words on page, you'd think that's not funny. But as soon as he delivers the line or delivers, actually sort of inhabits the character, it comes alive. He
Mhm.
he was just funny.
And that's good. Just thinking back to the first podcast that Case and I did together. One of the common themes was Rick's faces. That
Oh,
was that was just one of the things that was mentioned 3 or 4 times. The faces that Rick pulls as Richie in Bottom, and that was just something that people just loved.
yeah,
Just him just doing whatever face it was. And if you put them together, I think I did a post recently actually about range. I just recycled an old post about this being range. And yeah, it's almost impossible to find a screen grab from Bottom with Rick just putting a normal face. Like
yeah, that's right.
it doesn't just look like just smiling or whatever. There's always some ridiculous face that he's putting.
Oh,
Um,
he had an incredible face because I mean, he was a good-looking guy. He was
mhm.
a really good-looking guy, and but he went out of his way to sort of subvert that, in terms of his, and it's a horrible expression, rubber-faced or whatever it's used a bit for a lot of people, but he did have that incredible ability just to create an expression that would have you laughing.
Well, that's one of the things that I always find so absurd about Bottom is how Eddie always calls him like a fat, ugly, sweaty, or they was sweaty. Obviously, you can't fake that.
God, yeah, he sweated a
Sweaty
lot.
rubber
Yeah,
Johnny full of custard, for example.
yeah, yeah,
And somehow Rick pulls it off really well. He is that in Bottom, but in reality,
yeah.
he wasn't that at all. So that in itself is a feat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and like you say with the fluffs and everything, people loved that. Like if you watch
Yeah.
the live shows, people loved it as much when he got it wrong as
Mm.
the lines that have been rehearsed and delivered 100 times. Yeah, people loved it when he got it wrong.
It'd be a magician giving away his secrets, but I mean, if I want to boost the traffic to the page,
Yeah,
all I just do is post a bunch of fluffs and live
Yeah.
show cock-ups because people love it so much. It just gets amazing interaction versus anything else. It's people just absolutely love it. Those posts just what people love more than anything else. So that's always a an easy win from a posting perspective.
Yeah, but I think you see that his sort of relish in getting it wrong is as
Mm,
much as his relish in getting it right.
mhm.
And that was again something that runs right the way through his career is that sense of getting things wrong. Whatever it is, and deliberately so, either deliberately so or accidentally or whatever, it was he just relished in taking a convention and then subverting it by getting it wrong. Yeah.
One of the things that always comes through the I spot is how he would often just kind of mispronounce things or pronounce them slightly differently. Like when he says sandwiches or
Yes.
suitcases. I know you can say it that way, but
Yeah.
there's just always just drops the odd word in bottom that he'll just pronounce, not necessarily wrong, or
Yeah.
it just in a slightly different way. That was always one of the things that I found funniest.
Oh yeah.
Just a slight
Yeah.
mispronunciation of something.
No, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, he was a very well-spoken person. He was very erudite, and so yeah, I think he reveled in language. I mean, this, again, sounding a bit pretentious, but he did. He loved language, and he loved the sound of words and messing around with those words. He was always, when I was working with him on the book, he loved sort of street slang but getting it wrong. And we have a
Mhm.
bit of that on the Panglobal Phenomenon when Sid, his son, comes in and he's trying to teach Rik some of the sort of teenage slang sort of phrases, and he loves sort of taking those things and just messing them around and getting them wrong. And yeah, it's like again a constant with him, really.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.